I'm really hoping to make an impact in the developer world and get some people to really play with this and to begin to see for themselves. I think it will totally transform it. And I think developers can become heroes in our race against warming as they build in a way that cools the planet. The other thing is to get people to really treasure and value water in the soil. Everybody has some soil that they have some impact on, and you can do what you can to make sure that water stays in that soil. Those two things are on my list for the next 6 months.
I looked a bit at your website, and are you in Spokane?
I am. I'm in Spokane.
Spokane, sorry. Could you tell me a bit about the work that you're doing?
Well, our work is focused on the biotic pump. The biotic pump is nature's cooling system for the planet. It's been effective for 65 million years or more. And it's something that we have very incredibly interfered with, to the point that she's got to figure out another way to rebalance herself, which is what we're experiencing now. The good news is that we can we can help her. We can work with what she needs to have happen so that the biotic pump functions. And in so doing, we can do our part in recooling the planet, which would be of benefit to us and everything else on it right now.
And what do your projects look like?
So we have the capacity to take a project from first how water and sun want to move across the piece of property to build and design with every piece being regenerative and the earth being healed at every step of the way.
And is it mainly at the municipal scale, your projects, or is it individual?
It could be either one. It's easier to do individuals because people can kind of do what they want on their property. But we are working with the city, and I'm actually kind of pushing hard. The river that runs through the town, the Spokane River, which is a very good sized river, ran dry. And so that kind of got people's attention. And of course, the response is to use less water. Well, that's not going to impact the river very much. And we've been talking about using less water, and we have a very well-respected use less water program that has been marginally effective for decades. That doesn't seem like it's really going to solve the problem, since it hasn't kept the problem from happening in the first place. So I'm really suggesting that we learn how to keep water instead of getting rid of it, which is what the biotic pump is all about, is keeping water. So that's how the water cycle works. It works because there's water in the soil that the plants can transfer from soil to air so that it can fall back down again. And if any of those parts are missing, it doesn't work.
And so on an individual property, would that be swales, or what kind of?
Yes, swales and dry creeks, and there's all sorts of ways of holding water. So looking to see what that land wants to do. Now, sometimes we're really good at making things flat because it makes it easy for us. So we can remove a lot of that memory, actually. So then you get to add it back, and you can do that. We've got a great example in Village Homes in Davis, California. It's a 60-acre wheat field that was flat. It was designed to hold water. The design of the subdivision was designed to hold water. So the streets become water catchment areas, and so the water is shunted to very specific places on the property. And then the property has swales and other methods to hold the water there so it will sink. That's the other piece. It's got to stay long enough to go down. And that development is 220 homes, 25 multifamily homes, and 8 businesses. It is 15 degrees cooler than its next door neighbor. And the houses there, it was built in 1974, started in 1974. And the houses there, for the most part, don't have air conditioning. They weren't built with air conditioning. And a friend was there last week, and the temperature outside was 101, and the temperature inside the house was 76. No air conditioning. So it has a huge number of fruit and nut trees. They bought those trees. They took the $200,000 that they would have put into concrete infrastructure, which is what most developments have, pipes that go off the infrastructure to take the water. And they didn't do that. And that was a big fight with the city, who was sure that it would flood. So they had to put up a huge bond to protect themselves from possible damage from flooding. So they paid the bond and they spent that money on fruit trees. Well, they had flooding events, and what they found was that when it rained a lot, that property actually took water from the neighbors. It was able to absorb extra water into its site and prevented flooding, and so they got their bond back. And in 2021, they had a 500-year rain event where it rained 5 inches in a day, and they had no flooding at all. We've interviewed the designer builders. They're still alive. So we've been talking to them, and it's starting to be recognized for what it is. I mean, it is a remarkable way of building, and it's what we need to do going forward. We need to become partners with the planet when we build instead of adversaries, and all of our building is adversarial. We eliminate any real chance for water to sit. We don't water on our property. We are designing everything to take water away from our property and to put it, in the garbage, basically, to send it away to the river instead of keeping it. And that makes everything dry. We're actually throwing away that treasure instead of keeping it on site. So every raindrop should stay where it falls. That's what Zach Weiss says, and he's absolutely right. If we do that, we can get through this in a much better state. It will never be as cool as it was. I mean, that can't happen because we've lost so much ice. So that piece of our stable climate has disappeared, and it will have to restabilize at a new temperature. What that is, I don't know. Nobody knows. But I am absolutely sure if we did our part to cool the planet and to help nature do what nature wants to do, we will be way cooler than if we don't. And if we don't, it may be too hot for our species to survive.
And for your organization, what are the main challenges?
Getting people to understand the water cycle. It is so interesting how we all know how the water cycle works. We were taught that in elementary or high school. People get that water evaporates and it falls on the ground. What they don't get, that it needs to stay in the ground. That's the piece that's been missing. And yet we have that information. When you talk to people about where rivers come from, oh, well, they come out of hillsides. They're springs, right? And they just gather water as they go down the mountain. Well, where does the water in the ground come from? That's not been in anybody's mind. It's just like, deer in the headlights. I don't know, it's magic, right? It's just magically there. Well, it's not magically there. It's magically there if the land can hold the water that falls on it. Then it's magic.
Are you trying to change municipal policies, or would it be, what's that process look like?
It's really messy at this point in time. I'm having lots of conversations with lots of different parts of city government. I'm on several committees in the city. I am pushing for people to first understand this, which is difficult. They don't want to take the time to watch the videos. It's only me. I don't have the right credentials. There are all these reasons why they can dismiss the things I say. It sounds contra what you knew in the past. And I've been accused of upsetting 40 years of science. We haven't understood until recently how rain happens. So when I tell them that we can make the rain fall, it seems preposterous. So there's that hurdle. And I firmly believe it doesn't take a whole lot, that there are things that are so easy and actually relatively inexpensive to do. Nothing is free. But I don't think it's going to take a ton of money to make the changes that need to be changed. So what I'm recommending from the city perspective is a couple of things. I'd love to see an ordinance actually at the state level that would say that new development needs to design the land to hold water before it builds. That is one very simple thing that would make a huge impact. It would be a hiccup for developers who've never thought about that. Thank you so much. Who would prefer to decide where the house goes instead of let the land tell them where the house goes, who fear that they're going to not have enough units on a piece of property instead of being more inventive in their building to get the units that they want. All of those things are possible and not major changes and not really expensive. And in fact, if done, would reduce their building costs and reduce their maintenance costs. And we can prove that. We've got data to show that. So that's one leverage point that would have a really huge impact. And then the city itself can start to look at where it can start to hold water. There's a worldwide movement of sponge cities where cities around the world are figuring out how to keep water, how to make their soil spongy so it will hold water. That's something that the city could do. So we've got parks and we've got golf courses are two major areas. Every university has a huge campus. So we've got three really huge spots that have lots of land that there's basically nothing on that could be looked at and changed to hold water. And there's a variety of things to do. Add compost, add biochar, and then add swales and whatever, wherever you can, to create ponds and holding spaces for water. Yeah, it would take a little bit of money, but not a lot. It would be minimally disruptive and it would have a huge benefit. The other piece of this, though, is it's not just holding water. You got to have the plant piece too. So we have recommended the Miyawaki planting method. It is a method of planting whole ecologies all at once. So where we are in Spokane, Washington, that looks like forests. And it means planting all those plants, all the things that live in the forest at the same time. They belong together. They've had agreements together. They know how to work together. They grow 8 times faster. They do need to be managed for 3 years. So maybe some weeding, maybe some watering, depending on the situation, but it's minimal. And then in 3 years, they're self-sustaining. In 25 years, they mimic growth. They bring back the biodiversity that we've lost because all of a sudden the insects and the critters have a place that they didn't have before. And you plant them, they're mini forests. So there are 6 cart places big. That's not very big. It's big. It's as big as many backyards. So to do those in pockets throughout the city begins to create the foliage that you need to create the pump and get the trans evaporation going. Once that's going, then you will have rain.
Of your private clients, are you getting some people to put in those mini forests?
We're getting people to start to think about it. Yes. It is a long process. And you can't just plant a forest any place. There are things like power lines and pipes under the ground and that kind of stuff. And I also really want, and this is another change that the city needs to make, our city in particular, for wild places here, they're zoned R1, and R1 means that they're residential. So that means there's really no protection, that if you decide to build a house, you can build a house. It's fine. You don't have to ask permission. If you own the land, you get to take the plants out. So there needs to be a designation for wild spaces that stay wild. And that should be one of the concerns with the Miyawaki forest, because you're planting them for the long haul, not for the short haul. We harvest a lot of the trees that we do in plantations in about 20 years. They really don't hit their stride till they're 80 years old. So we're not taking, and they're not contributing much at all to the biosphere because they're taken down before they really have the oomph to do that. It's a patience game. It's a long-term game, and you have to start letting things exist for a long enough term to be effective.
And in terms of the social organization, do you have allies?
I do have allies. Like I said, we have a team now of 8 people who can do that process from start to finish. So as a group, we can come in and do that. That's including the architecture. So there aren't a lot of architects that are working with passive solar, which means you understand how to get a building to use what nature provides, and it's designed into the building. And that's where the reduction in maintenance really happens. If that's done well, then you don't have to pay for it forever. So we have that piece together. It's really been interesting because you would just assume that all the other environmental groups would be allies, and in a way they are. But not really, because they don't get what we're doing and they don't get how to change what they're doing to be in alignment with it. So we have the same kind of passive resistance, like, well, we just put trees in front of houses. It works fine. Well, it doesn't work fine. We lose a lot of them, and people don't want trees in front of their houses. So it's been a hard row, and it takes a lot to water them. So maybe really it's not as functional. And if we started doing them in pockets in places, maybe that would be just as effective. And we haven't moved to the pocket piece.
I find this social engineering fascinating in all of this. I think early on in the bioregion thing, like I did an ecology degree in the 90s. So, you know all this. We used to
Yeah.
call it we used to call it ecology. And then like 10 years ago, I did a permaculture course. And and I had literally not, I don't think I'd heard the term bioregionalism, despite now learning that it's got this long and glorious history, at least in the Pacific Northwest. The language is really tricky. Like even permaculture, I find it's a terrible word. It's so, people resist it. That being said, I'm curious about the permaculture of people right now because we have so many, it seems we have so many human resources. But to your point, when people are used to doing things their own way, because everyone's got these great stories. And this is what I'm fascinated by. It's going to take more than stories, it's going to take shovels, and
Yep.
seeds
Yep.
and
Yep.
swales. So, a couple more questions. Have you heard of open source ecology?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's this guy, Marcin Jakubowski. I probably got his name wrong. And he's been designing blueprints for open source machines like tractors, generators, brick
Okay.
things. I'll skip to the end where they've designed a house, which in theory, or what their claim is, you can build it in 5 days for $100,000 US because it's all prefabricated.
Okay.
And it's supposed to have so kind of where I'm getting to is like with that project you were talking about in Davis, was it? Are the plans open source? Could they just be shared?
I don't know about that. I could ask. I mean, it's the only one we found. There are a
Mm,
couple. The Carl Welty, who's our architect, has been working in California for a long time, and he was part of another project, Meadowbrook, I believe, that is similar in many respects. And it has been successful too. It doesn't have the success that Davis has. Davis is truly a remarkable model in so many ways, and part of that is the human piece as well, because the way it was designed, people buy their house and they own a piece of the entire 60 acres. So it's
mm,
like a land trust with houses,
right.
which I think is actually an excellent model. And we're looking at that in Spokane for affordable housing to reduce the cost of housing, of building houses, because you're not paying for land. And it allows you the ability to truly design the whole structure instead of doing piecemeal buildings, which make it much more difficult to hold water once you cut it up into little pieces like that. So it's a model that we really support, but it's not been done anywhere else. Nobody's paid any attention to it till now. It's just been sitting there for 50 years. But we have 50 years of proof.
I did the Jeff Lawton online permaculture course, and he at one point tours somewhere in the Midwest, or maybe it was California, where during the New Deal, they built these earthworks, these massive earthworks
Oh,
to, slow spread and soak, like things that were like 20 feet, 30 feet high. And he goes and visits one and he walks up one side where there's no trees, and then you look down and there's this beautiful forest. So I mean, I think, as you say, none of this stuff's new. Like when they were when the indigenous people are in the Pacific Island, they had a whole system which was it had to be regenerative, otherwise they wouldn't have survived. And I suppose this is where I'm interested, both like how does it multiply? Like things like land trust. When I heard the idea, I was like, why doesn't everybody do a land trust? Because you're and I suppose again it's the social piece where people have to get along and
they have to take responsibility. That is very hard in our culture. We are not
mm,
used to taking responsibility. I spent 6 years working with a mobile home park to become self-owned.
okay.
Okay. And that we did not get to the land trust piece. They found a nonprofit that was willing to buy it and let them manage it. That was the workaround there.
Okay.
So, okay. But a land trust works really well for mobile home parks too,
Mm,
because they're now being bought up. I mean, there are lots of them are in wonderful areas along rivers, along oceans. They've got great land value.
mm.
And so, if you own it, you just get rid of those folks and you can make, a couple of $1 million, no problem. But they're
What
cash cows.
yeah. Well, this is what I mean. It shocked me. I mean, there's both Airbnbs, which I hate slash have used, so it's this hypocrisy that we all live with. But then, so have you heard of this regenerative real estate podcast?
No, I haven't heard about the podcast. I know there is a small industry that has started in building eco villages.
Hmm.
I am not at all convinced that they understand the eco part.
Oh, interesting. Because
And most eco villages that we've seen don't. They don't understand the land. That's the piece. So an eco village is green. So you want to have plants around it. So maybe you don't want to have hard surfaces. Those are all good things. Maybe you want to have round houses. That may not be a good thing in terms of actually keeping heat. So it's this kind of stuff where there's a lot of mythology around what's ecologically good and very little data-driven ecologically good stuff. And I think that's one of Carl's real strengths because he has been an architect for as long. He's been working in this area for so long, and he has been experimenting in his own way with the companies he's worked with. And he really digs into what works and what doesn't. We're seeing the same kind of mythology around forest fires. So the talk around forest fires is that you don't want forests to burn, which is not true, and that forest fires burn houses, which is actually not true either. Most of the houses that disappear in fires, which are not necessarily forest fires, in fires, come from the embers. And it has very little to do with the actual trees. And in fact, we have picture after picture after picture where the house is gone. There's nothing there but the foundation, and the vegetation around it is fine. Now, that should give people pause. You should start to think about what we're really talking about here. And we're not. We're trying to protect the house, and we protect the house by cement for 500 feet around it, and then it'll be okay. Well, it's not going to protect it from embers, frankly. And the things that we're building with are incredibly flammable.
I saw a terrible video that they compared a test house full of like furniture from the 1920s or something versus modern furniture. Because essentially everything today is plastic. So,
yes.
Whereas the other stuff, it barely burned at all. Like it,
yes.
Because it was,
yes. And that's old growth and new growth forest too.
Yeah. Well, when
old growth doesn't really burn. New growth doesn't have growth. So yes, it does burn.
Well, and
it's not green enough.
It's hollow because like the old growth, when our house was from 1918 and the renovator handed me like a 4x4 and it was massively heavy. Like it was so dense.
Yes.
So on this podcast, one of the terms I hadn't heard before was an agri-hood, where rather than build a community around a golf course, they're building communities around farms. So there are instances where there would be a family farm, the owners, the descendants don't want to continue it, but they want it to stay farmland. So a couple of these stories are, and it's all questions of zoning, like are they allowed to then build on that land, but keeping the farm at the center of it.
Yeah, we could help, I think through that. One of the beauties of Davis is that you can have a garden and there's garden plots available for anybody who lives there. But there's always also all these fruit and nut trees that anybody can pick from. And they have a whole range of fruit. Bill Mollison, who's a really big permaculture guy, walked through it and just was like euphoric. We've got the video about how wonderful it was. I mean, it's a paradise in so many ways. And because the land is co-owned, the responsibility doesn't fall on an individual person. It's managed through a group, and they actually do hire some people to do some of that kind of thing. Because, and so you have to think through how the system works. But it has worked really well for 50 years. Now they're starting to have some problems because people are dying and new people are moving in who have no understanding and have a very different lifestyle than they did in the 70s. So if you can, and the houses now are not $70,000, they're $1.5 million. So if you're going to pay $1.5 million for a house, you're working a lot and you're probably not doing much gardening because you're not home much. So there's some changes that the culture has brought that have not really been, well, there's no way to really foresee them, I think, but there are ways of addressing them, which they're thinking about now.
Do they have a diversity of housing there, like low income, single
Yes,
person?
they do actually.
Yeah, that always seems to be one of the pieces because some of what I've read about eco villages or the history of eco villages or
Oh, you
intentional
can't
communities.
afford them.
Yeah, well, because they either fail, like, or it turns into some kind of cult where it's a charismatic leader, and then that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Right.
Or it succeeds, and then the speculators come in because it's a paradise, and
Yeah.
they start selling it off. In the original whatever permaculture design guide, at the end of it, where he does start talking about villages and village design, almost, and I guess land trusts have elements of this where you're only allowed to sell it back to the trust, and then the trust can vet, I suppose, who
Right.
comes in. Another thing that I've been fascinated by is, okay, how do we make urban living more sustainable? And a term I've been thinking about was minimum viable person. Like, what does it look like to be in a city, but to have connections with your neighbors, have reciprocity? And along those lines, in Montreal, where I am, as in so many other cities, the speculators have come in and they've bought up whole streets and driven out like bookstores and all of this stuff because they just doubled the rent. So I've heard a couple of stories of people forming commercial real estate co-ops, essentially displacing the speculators by getting 1,000 people to put in $1,000. And then, but one of these stories, and it was a great story somewhere south of here in America, where the main street had gotten gutted. A community group formed a co-op, bought some places, but then it was all volunteers. So the management of it was basically subsidized by volunteers. And this is a real convoluted question, but it's around, I suppose, social organizing. And it's kind of like trying to bring people together, but essentially valuing their time so that it doesn't have to be volunteerism. I wonder if you have any thoughts
Well,
on.
actually do. We have a whole series on rethinking community on both our network and our YouTube. There is a guy named Mark Lakeman in Oregon
Mhm.
who has been doing community development for a long time. He is an amazing person. He really gets the people piece, and he is very clever about how to redesign the city. He has many projects where you can take a block of people and get them to reorient to the backyard.
Okay.
So you have to get, I mean, that's the people piece, is getting people to understand it, to want to participate. When they reorient to the backyard and you open up that space, now you have enough land to actually manage water on it.
Mhm.
And so you can do that in the backyard space, and then to create a place for them to be there that serves them all. And he's done a number of those. There's another guy also in Oregon who buys up apartment buildings and creates co-ops out of them so that they become ecological co-ops. And he puts in gardens and does all sorts of things where people begin to participate in working on the garden and designing what's there and become part of the community and how that community shows up. So there are several models that use what we have and really rethink how that goes, which I think is a really big step. We don't have to tear it all down and build it back up again, but we do need to rethink how we use what we have.
I know on a small scale, we've been sort of, or at least to my way of thinking, lucky in Montreal for the last 10 years or so, having a pretty ecologically conscious municipal. And sadly, they'll probably get driven out because that's the way of the world. But it's things like green alleys. Montreal has all these
Yes.
fantastic alleys, which were all paved. I mean, they were initially probably not, but then they were all paved, and now they're making like water infiltration. I love that kind of brick, the bricks that have the holes in them, so
Yeah.
you can drive a car over it, but it will also
It's
um,
permeable.
it's permeable. And this is, I suppose, I'm probably a dreamer, but so many of these things just seem like common sense. And so I don't really understand how they're not making more money, I guess is part of the piece. And so before we run out of time, like looping back to how Davis was able to save money on the infrastructure, and you were saying you had the data with that. Could you speak a bit about what form that takes, and is that something you can bring to developers to say like, well, why don't we try this?
Absolutely. And we do want to bring it to developers. One of the things about infrastructure in particular, and the way we do infrastructure, is first, it's designed to take things away. And second, it's fixed. So it does not have any flexibility. And because of where we are now, the regular rhythm that we're used to in terms of waterfall and that kind of stuff is no longer in existence. So we're getting magnitudes of water that we didn't get before. And we have an infrastructure that is not able to take care of it. It's just not flexible at all. And water has its own way. Water wins, as Elaine Guy says, Erica Guy says, water wins. And so that's always expensive and painful. So creating green infrastructures that are flexible and malleable and can expand or retract depending on how much water is there is the way to go. And you're not spending money on cement. You're spending money on trees, which is a really different kind of expense. And trees are magical in so many ways, not only the transevaporation, but it's the root system that's also very important, because you need part of the ability of soil to hold water is not just that it's alive, but that it's alive is really the first key. But the structure of it has to be open and porous enough that you have both air and water in it. And the roots really help make that happen. The roots and the nematodes and the big things that dig through there are where that happens. So you've got to have both pieces. We tend to think of soil in the agriculture world as a matter of chemicals. And so that's why fertilizer is nitrogen and all of that kind of stuff. We're just adding these chemicals and thinking it's good to go, but it's not true. It's actually a collection of living things. There are at least 4, I'm sure there's more than 4, but there's 4 that we pay most attention to. Bacteria and protozoa and nematodes and fungi are kind of the 4 big general areas. And there's billions of things in each of those areas. So being able to see what's in the soil makes a really big difference. That's the only way you know that life is there, is by actually seeing that it is alive. So we use Elaine Ingram soil food web expertise to be able to see with microscopes what's in the soil, so that we're not guessing and we're not adding stuff to it. We're feeding the life what the life needs to eat, which is each other, to keep it alive. And then the roots of the plants give it that structure that allows it to hold water. So you have to have all these pieces. And they're not rocket science, but they all have to be there and they all have to be managed. We love compost. Compost is a great thing. Most compost is bacteria rich. It has nothing else in it. That's not sufficient. So you have to see what's in the soil, see what's in the compost to be able to address in a conscious way what needs to be balanced. And we can add the biology. We can add that, but you got to know what to add. And every place is different. It's not like you can just one size fits all.